At the beginning we see a young boy floating lifelessly in the depths of water. It seems that the young man is dead, but in that very moment he opens his eyes. This story takes us back one day, where Joshua, along with Victoria and Carl, is on his way to an ancient cave to take part in a dangerous expedition. For more than a month Josh's father, Frank, an experienced speleologist, and the rest of the expedition team have been somewhere in the depths of the cave. They have been trying unsuccessfully for several days now to move further down the underwater system. The instruments show that they have reached a dead end and there is no further way out. Frank examines the map, and finds a small passageway in which his gut tells him there is a path further into the depths of the cave. Frank's friend George asks Frank to talk Jude, a diver, out of taking another dive. Since she had only slept a few hours and is very exhausted, she really doesn't look well. But despite her fatigue, she dives deep underwater again to explore the place that they saw earlier on the map with Frank. At the same time, underwater, Frank notices a rapid movement of silt. He disassembles the rocks blocking the passage ahead and tells Jude that it is possible to swim through it. The team watching the divers tries to talk Frank out of the idea, as the passage is very narrow. But he doesn't listen to them and keeps swimming. Jude has no choice but to follow her partner. On the way, she is stopped by a rebreather hooked by a hose on the rocks. Jude begins to panic and yanks the hose violently, trying to get it out from under the pile of rocks. Frank knows that panic is a diver's worst enemy and asks Jude to calm down. He frees her from the trap and they move on down the narrow underwater trails. In the meantime, the trio and their escort, Luco, descend further through the narrow part of the caves to make their way to the camp where the team is staying. Along the way, Josh tells the group that he doesn't like expeditions, but his father never asked his opinion. Carl and Victoria can't understand Josh's feelings. They see Frank as a brilliant explorer, while Josh thinks his father is just obsessed with flashlights and rocks. Finally, Frank and Jude find themselves in an incredibly beautiful cave filled with water. Ahead of them, the speleologists notice a bubble of air, where Frank's gut tells them there may be a new cave system. They rejoice and congratulate each other on their discovery, for before they thought the cave had been fully explored and there was nowhere else to go. Frank wants to continue his journey, but Jude, exhausted, asks him to leave the exploration of the bubble to Carla and return to camp. On the way back, Frank notices that her hose is damaged. He wants to swim closer and help, at which point the hose completely ruptures, releasing the rest of the oxygen. Jude has another panic attack and begins to sink rapidly to the bottom. Frank grabs her and gives her his mask so they can take turns breathing. This idea proves to be a failure, as Jude does not want to give his partner his oxygen mask for fear of suffocating. Frank is forced to make a choice between surviving on his own or dying together with Jude. The man snatches the mask back and no longer gives it to the girl. Jude begs him to give it back, but Frank remains adamant and silently watches his girlfriend drown. Completely drowned, Jude dies. Josh sees what has happened on video. In tears, he blames his father for Jude's death and is convinced that he killed his partner in cold blood by taking her oxygen mask. George tries to talk sense into the boy and says that if Frank hadn't done that, they both would be dead. But Josh doesn't believe the argument, because he is sure that it was his father who forced Jude to take the plunge even though she was tired. His son's words are heard by Frank, lifting the girl's breathless body outside. He informs the crew that they are all getting out of the cave. In the meantime, a powerful tropical storm is raging over the island. In the cave, the team moves away from Jude's death and tries unsuccessfully to contact the ground camp. A conversation ensues between Frank and Josh in which Josh continues to blame his father for what happened. Frank says that Jude was exhausted because she had to carry the backups that Josh was supposed to bring down but forgot. Offended by his father's words, the boy decides to head outside with Luco, Liz and JD to alert the ground crew of their decision to go up. In one part of the cave, they see water coming down toward them, brought on by a heavy downpour. Josh finally manages to contact the camp. From above, they tell them to go up immediately, as the storm has turned into a cyclone. Meanwhile, they try to climb up, but a torrent of water flooding the cave prevents them from doing so. JD and Liz manage to climb up and call out to the others. Josh realizes that his father and the others are left without communication at all. Together with Luco, he decides to go to them to warn the crew of the impending danger. However, Frank himself notices that the cave is beginning to flood and is going to evacuate the rest of the cave dwellers. They are delayed by Carl, who has gone to dive without warning anyone. The cave becomes more and more flooded with a powerful stream of water. Climbing up the slippery rocks, Frank meets Luco and Josh. He asks them to throw down a rope that they can use to climb up. Victoria is the first to start climbing, but the rock to which the rope is attached starts to move. Luco tries to hold the rock with his body, and Josh yells for Victoria to come back down. But she ignores him, which causes her and Josh to fall down into the water together. Unable to hold on to the rock any longer, Luco also falls down, hitting the rocks with his back. The rock covers the exit from the cave and blocks the team's way up. Down below, Josh desperately tries to pull Luco out of the water, but he's stuck tightly among the rocks. Frank pulls his son away and Luco's body is carried away by the current. Frank suggests that the team find another way out and swim to that air bubble they previously discovered with Jude. They make their way back to the camp, which is completely washed out by the water. Frank tells the crew to take everything they need with them. Without emotion, he tries to remove the wetsuit from Jude's dead body to give it to Victoria. She refuses to take the suit from a dead body. Victoria assures Frank that she is a climber, not a diver, so she would be uncomfortable swimming further in the wetsuit and can manage without it. Luco's body is swept up to the camp. He is still alive, but his bones are broken and his body is badly disfigured. Frank decides to spare his partner the excruciating pain and drowns him in front of his son, which makes Josh feel even more contempt for his father. The team gives a short briefing to Victoria and they dive into the water together. Following each other, they swim out to the underwater cave. Victoria lags behind the others because her limbs are freezing without her wetsuit. Because of the stress, she forgets how to breathe properly in the mask. But, overcoming panic, she swims to the air bubble with her team. The team swims out, where they discover a new cave. Carl tries to warm Victoria, who is freezing cold with his body, while George begins to suffer from the bends. Frank forces him to breathe oxygen, after which he tells the crew that they need to rest. After a while, Frank reassembles everyone and tells them that they must explore the caves further because there is no help to be had. George's illness quickly progresses. He is coughing heavily and bleeding from his mouth. Realizing that he cannot go on, George deliberately lags behind the team, so that he can hide in the canyon of the cave and die there. Upon discovering his friend's plan to not delay the team, Frank sets out to find his friend, but finds only an inscription on a rock that reads, "George was here." The team moves on down the river and it leads them to a precipice. To get further, they need to get to the other side of the cave. Frank decides to finally trust his son with something and lets him secure a rope on the other side of the cave. The boy accomplishes the task and the team cautiously begins to move along the rope. Due to hypothermia, Victoria can't feel her hands very well. So when she tries to cross over the rope, she falls off and dangles by her hair that is stuck in a piece of equipment. In unbearable pain, she tries to use a knife to free her hair. Along with her hair, Victoria accidentally cuts the rope she is holding onto and falls down, crashing into the cliff. Victoria's death has a profound effect on Carl and Josh. Frank is dismissive of what happened and calmly explains exactly what rash actions led to the girl's death. Astonished at his partner's callousness, Carl realizes that Josh was right about his father's obsession. After reaching another underwater trail, Carl steals the team's last piece of equipment without asking and sets out on his own to find a way out of the cave. Frank tries to catch up with his partner, but can't do it without his gear. So he returns back to Josh. Both father and son almost give up hope of getting out when Josh smells bat droppings. This discovery means only one thing. Somewhere above, there is a way out. Climbing up the gorge, they reach another cave, which is illuminated by sunlight from a hole at the top. Underneath it, they find an old Japanese tank, which has fallen down into the cave. Unfortunately, the hole that formed after the tank fell is too high and climbing out is impossible. Having reconciled with his son during their journey, Frank gives him the choice to stay here and wait for help or move on and find another way out. Josh decides to move on and, having constructed torches from whatever tools they could find, they make their way back to the caves. There they meet Carl, who tries to justify himself for his actions and asks his partners for food. It is also there that Frank discovers Victoria's body, which had been swept away by the current of the river. He ignores all of Carl's pleas to forgive him, which completely drives the businessmen crazy. A fight ensues between the men, after which Frank falls on a stalactite. Josh pulls Carl away from his father, but it is too late, he is mortally wounded. Carl starts to blame Frank for everything, but then realizes what he has done and jumps into the water without his equipment. Josh tries to help his father, but his back is badly damaged and his legs are paralyzed from the impact. He asks his son to help him and end his suffering. Sobbing, Josh drowns his father and lets his lifeless body float downstream. The boy then takes his last oxygen tank and swims through the channel. Along the way, he encounters Carl, who is dead and probably drowned looking for a way out. The tank runs out of oxygen and Josh inhales air bubbles from the ceiling of the cave. But it's not enough, so he loses consciousness and we find ourselves back in the first scene of the movie. Josh's father's voice plays in his head, telling him that they're almost home. An image of Frank gives the boy the strength to swim on. So Josh finds his way out and swims to shore, where the locals find him. At the end of the movie, the boy realizes that the cave helped him realize what an incredible man his father was.